and we hope to cover the power of purpose, tackling change and building alignment in 40 minutes with 10 minutes for questions. I won't be moderating this. Hannah's going to be moderating. Hannah, what is the highlights from your working career?
Good morning, everybody. My highlight was a piece of work I did with the National Commission on Disability, where I designed the first ever participatory piece of research to understand the prevalence and issues of people affected by disability. And it passed the first ever Bill of Rights in Guyana for disabled people, which shows that, and it made me completely rethink a career in kind of traditional research and think about the power of participation in that journey and the ability for data to affect change.
It's pretty awesome, actually. Ross?
Hardly antipode.
Yeah. Beat that, Ross.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. Mine is 3 years early on in my career when I was part of a team who designed and delivered at the world's largest vocational education event in London. And it was about inspiring a generation of young people very good career choices and seeing them as credible choices in technical and vocational education as thank you, as it is in academic.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mufeedah.
Thank you. So mine's much more self-serving, I suppose. So
We like a bit of that.
Yeah. I started my career in financial services, and as you can imagine, it was a very white, male-dominated environment. So I'm really proud that I started within our organisation at the time a council to focus on diversity. And throughout my career, I was finding that that was becoming more of my focus and thinking about purpose. You know, my purpose was becoming more about diversity and less about the organisation and financial services, which led me to leave financial services and move into the not-for-profit sector.
Self-serving, but good for the world, I think. So well done for that. Okay, over to you, and I'll remind you on timing, Hannah.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about the power of purpose and why this is so important in your impact journey. So I'm going to start the session off, and then I'll ask Ross and Mufeedah to bring this to life for us, and then there'll be opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please feel free to be asking your questions while we go. So every charity and social purpose organisation comes to us because they are motivated by the difference that they want to make. But so many organisations are really struggling to articulate this. Commonly, too much data. Commonly, reports that go out of date. No one actually reads them. They're just not at the front of decision making. Board meetings with sort of 120 pages of narrative, really struggling to get to the actual crux of the matter. And so many kind of chief executives and even sort of boards and senior management teams want to do this better, really struggling how. And so we have these conversations about, right, yeah, we want some good data. Great, we want some good data, okay. But for us, you can't get to good data until you're so clear on what your purpose is. So for many organisations, they want a data visualisation when they come to us. They're really motivated. They've seen Trust Impact do these awesome live visualisations. And then we say, OK, we're going to come and talk to you about purpose. You know, that's for purpose, that's your role in delivering your vision, and that's being clear on need. And that's when the eyes mist over. But we did that a couple of years ago. I can't go back to my board with this. Oh, it's just too difficult. And actually what we say to people is if you want to make a decision about what to measure, you have to be really clear on your role, your purpose, and then that enables you to measure what matters. And you can only get to clarity when you're prepared to prioritise what you measure and to begin to sort of test and learn and build on this with a smaller number of metrics. And once you have the clarity on your purpose, you can really begin to use data for decision making. So for us, we've seen in real time that so often sort of charity boards and senior management teams aren't able to really bring data to life. One client, we had the pleasure to take our sort of early sort of sprint worth of data to a board meeting. And one trustee said, I've been a trustee for 8 years in this organisation and I've never seen data about the people we serve come to a board meeting, ever. yet they are there to protect the strategic assets of the charity. And it's just phenomenal how starting small, beginning to collect some simple data consistently across your organisation can be so important, but purpose, being clear on what role you have so you can make decisions, becomes so important. So building alignment on purpose. This means having some very difficult conversations. In trust impact, we call these strategic tensions. These tensions are a bit like, who do we really serve? Who are our beneficiaries? Who are our key audiences? What is the actual change? Should we really be doing this? So every organisation has strategic tensions. There's no one in the organisation that doesn't, in the room that won't have them. But the courage to really lean in and address them is really important to collect clarity. There's some great speakers coming to talk to you about that. But you've got to bring different people into this decision making. We talked about participation, we talked about different voices in the room. When we are sort of really looking and discovering purpose, we're bringing together different perspectives, not just the board and the senior leadership team. Often the insights from beneficiaries and frontline staff are the nuggets that really can convince an organisation to be bolder and clearer on the purpose. And these conversations, these dialogues, you don't always get to agreement, but you have the discussions that you need to have to earth the things that everybody's been thinking but no one's been talking about. And then, as a leader, you're faced with making some big decisions about actually how do we respond to these strategic tensions? What will we do? What won't we deliver? And where are we best placed to make the impact? And how ambitious can we be on our journey? And for us particularly, we see that often bringing new perspectives of people together to discuss purpose, to explore purpose, really creates these light bulb moments when people can finally get behind a sort of new purpose statement for an organisation and then begin to build a theory of change behind it. So for us, impact data isn't about proving what you do. I mean, it's great when it works. Countless lost times of charities phoning me up, this data that you're collecting, it's not showing a positive impact. Can you come and talk to our board about this? Yeah, happily, I can. So that is really interesting. So one client we had found that actually the sort of impact of their experience wasn't universal across all their young people, and there were certain groups who were consistently not sort of having the same impact. That was fascinating because that actually really enabled them to have a focus of a sort of a new equality and diversity and inclusion strategy in action on programme delivery. Or for another client we have working with refugees, their sense of belonging isn't getting any better. Is it any wonder in the current climate? But that evidence of need, we need to be here to support these people to enable to be in places where they can feel they can belong and that's the support. Is your sort of it is the data and evidence to really evidence what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you need to make that better. And finally, impact for every organisation and purpose is a journey. The benefits of getting clarity on your role as a charity are the same, but every individual journey is very, very different. There are different tensions, different stakeholders, different opportunities. So what we would really love to hear today, we've brought Mufeedah and Ross here to talk about their experience of looking at purpose as a tool for impact, and to really hear a little bit about how that felt and sort of learnings from that process.
Thank you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Hibiscus and our journey. So Hibiscus is an organisation that supports migrant women in immigration and criminal justice systems. So quite a tough environment, as you can imagine. But we've been going for about 40 years. And we sort of started off very much as that kind of grassroots, gritty organisation working on near Holloway Prison. So Holloway Prison's now closed, but it was a women's prison that very sort of notorious as well. And Olga Heaven, who was our founder, she started working with Black and migrant women in that prison. And she found a few things out. She found it out that there was a higher proportion of Black and migrant women being criminalised and being detained. She also identified that a lot of the women in there from Jamaica and Nigeria were being used as drug mules, were being trafficked, basically. And they were given much harsher sentences than their white counterparts, but also they were being given harsher sentences than the men who were behind all of these drug gangs and these trafficking as well. So, you can imagine a small sort of grassroots organisation, not a lot of resources, but a big voice. So doing a lot of work, a lot of advocacy. And over the course of, 20 years, being able to make a lot of change and being able to make a difference for the lives of those women in that prison. However, the environment has been getting tougher and things have changed. We've had more regulation. They needed to go from becoming a small organisation to becoming registered and becoming a charity. And that takes time and effort and money and all sorts. And then we had, of course, financial slumps. So we've just moved, we're just in the process of moving office. And I've been looking through some of our old papers and looking through some of our funding applications from the 90s. And they're like basically a letter saying, can you give us £10,000? And someone, writing a check. Yeah, much different to today. And everyone in this room knows how tough funding is at the moment. So what do we do? Well, no, I hope some of this is going to resonate with some of you as well. So we started to apply for funding that was perhaps taking us away from our purpose a little bit, but it was things that we could do, like mentoring, befriending, perhaps looking at voter engagement in Black communities, for example. And then we started to do more contract work as well. So we started to do more commissioned work from the Home Office, from the Ministry of Justice. And one of our biggest contracts was with the Home Office. And we started working in immigration removal centres. So these are detention centres. So rather than imprisoning migrants, we put them in detention centres and we just call them, it's still a prison by a different name. So for the last this was about 12 years ago, we started working with the Home Office contract. And what we were finding was actually the amount of people detained in detention, there was a much higher proportion of men than there were of women. And our focus was becoming more focused on the men. So about 4 or 5 years ago, as an organisation, and this is prior to my time at Hibiscus, we woke up and said, hang on a second, we're no longer the women's organisation that we started off at. Actually, how can we say we're a women's organisation when most of our beneficiaries are men? Something's wrong here. We need to have a look at this and do something a little bit different. And that's when Trust Impact came. And like I said, this was a little bit before my time. So when I first joined Hibiscus, we already had a theory of change. All that hard work, all that kind of change and purpose and hard discussions, that was already done. So I'm the lucky one there, but I don't want to underestimate the amount of work that went into that, and also the amount of challenge as well. So, to go from, supporting all of those men with all of their need in those detention centres, to making the decision to say, no, we're no longer going to do that. It was really tough. It was a tough decision. And, people working on the front line, wanting to know, why are we not doing this anymore? That was really challenging conversations. But what it came back down to was actually, what is our purpose? What is our niche? What is our skill set? And how can we really and truly make a difference to our beneficiaries and the people that really need us? Because, quite frankly, there are lots of organisations supporting migrants. There are lots of organisations supporting women. There's only one organisation supporting migrant women in immigration and criminal justice systems, and that's Hibiscus, and that's where our niche is. So that's where we kind of got to with our purpose. So like I say, Trust Impact came in and really helped with the theory of change. We looked at, we're a grassroots organisation. We deliver frontline services. What are we doing, and how can we actually structure the work that we do to think about, who are the people we're serving? What is the purpose of that work? What is the impact we want to make? And what is the outcomes we want to see? And like I said, 40 years ago, a lot of the advocacy and policy change that we could do was around, raising our voices, writing a letter, going and seeing someone in Parliament, going and badgering your MP. The world's changed. Things are a lot tougher now. So we started a policy team. It's a very small team, but we started a policy team really to help with that sort of influential and advocacy work. And a lot of that has come out of the theory of change as well. Similarly, we're doing more on public affairs, so we're really strengthening our communications team as well in order to help deliver and change public perception. So all of that kind of thinking and strategy and investment, all of that has come out of the theory of change. So now where we are on our sort of long journey is we're now at the phase of trying to measure our outcomes. So everyone in this room knows how tough it is at the moment in the funding environment. We've had one funder who has told us that they have, in the last year, the number of applications that they've received has increased by 3,000%, which is, And we know that we can no longer we're not going to be able to stand out by writing a really lovely narrative about the work that we do. We need to demonstrate the impact that we're making. We need to demonstrate the outcomes that the women that we are supporting, that they're getting in their lives as well through the work that we do. So that's been the real sort of focus for us. Now, the women that we work with, some of those, we work in 3 different environments. We work in the community, we work in prisons, and we work in the detention centres. So 3 different environments. The women in the detention centres, we will work with them for maybe 2 weeks, possibly up to 3 months. The women in prisons, we could work with them for maybe 3 or 4 years. The women in the community, we could be working with them for 8, 9, 10 years. So it's a long time to be able to measure outcomes and impact on someone's lives. So that's been a real sort of challenge for us to say, in those 3 different environments, how are we going to be able to use one metric or one measurement to be able to measure the impact that we're having in those different environments? So that's been interesting as well. The last thing I want to sort of say about Hibiscus is we're not a big organisation. We're small, our income is, this year it's going to, so last year it was almost 2 million. This year it's going to be almost sort of 1 million. And that's we made that decision because we decided to come out of the Home Office contract, which gave us a lot of money. And we've been able to prepare for that, and we've been able to prepare for this transition year. But we're not a massive organisation. But we've really seen the value of doing this work and making sure that we are prepared to be able to see out the next 40 years for Hibiscus as well.
Thanks, Mufeedah. Ross, over to you.
So if I ask you to consider what you think Ramblers is, I'm no mind reader, but I can probably imagine the picture you've got in your head. Individuals of their advanced years rambling around the countryside, maybe the fit and fleecy, maybe some bobble hats in there, or those who get really angry around planning applications or when a landowner blocks a footpath or obstructs it in some way. Now, those perceptions are a reality. Our data tells us that of our 103,000 members and 26,000 volunteers, the average age is 67. The significant majority are white, and the majority live in the most affluent communities in our country. Ramblers dates back to the 1930s. In the north of England, working class people seeking to get out of large, dirty, industrialised conurbations into the countryside to improve their health and well-being by walking in nature. And lo and behold, that apparent privilege wasn't afforded to them, and therefore the work began. Over our 89-year history, we've had loads of successes that we see as our springboard for the future, including landmark legislation which enables the general public at large today to access the outdoors responsibly. I was really clear when I joined Ramblers that this was a challenge around perception and relevance. And as a civil society organisation, what was the part we were playing to enable that relevance to come to the fore?
Despite current perceptions, I was really clear that this organisation had as much relevance now, if not more so, than it did back in the 1930s when the need was established. I see civil society as a big picture, and I see civil society organisations as jigsaw pieces in that big picture. And the question we were wrestling with was, what was the part we were playing? What was our small, tiny jigsaw piece of that much bigger picture? To seek to challenge ourselves, to think about some of the deep-rooted social challenges that this country is facing, and what was our part in seeking to address some of those? Be that the mental health crisis, be that loneliness and isolation, or be that the deep-rooted divisions we see in our communities. And all through the simple act of getting out walking. Now, you might say that's far too simplistic. It's dead easy to get out walking. Anyone can do it. The reality is there's a whole load of barriers placed in people's way, social and other barriers put in their way to get out walking. And you might say those deep-rooted social challenges require much more sophisticated, much more macro-level interventions to make a difference. But the reality was it's about getting more people out walking, particularly those who will benefit most. We started off on our journey to refresh our strategy. It was a difficult one. We had an old strategy we'd had for the last 10 years, and quite frankly, it was out of date. It was entirely internally focused, and we couldn't measure a thing. We really, if we had any outcome measures, that was a bonus, and we really couldn't measure anything. The reality is we'd lost our way, which you might think is a bit remarkable for the Ramblers. The journey was fascinating, and as Hannah alluded to, when we started working with Trust Impact on the theory of change, we started to wrestle really importantly with the question of purpose. If you start with your North Star, what is the purpose of this organisation, and what is the role it is playing in seeking to challenge and respond to some of those social challenges? The journey was absolutely fascinating. Very quickly we got to this really polarising tension. One about, this is a private members club and you will not come near it, over to, this is about a charity and the public benefit and the public interest, doing things for the broader population. We really couldn't understand the difference we wanted to make, nor for whom we wanted to make that difference. And that was a really soul-searching question, which again, gone back to that purpose point. We were really clear a researcher to inform the work that we did in developing our purpose. And actually, we paused our process to do more research, work with Trust Impact to say, can we go and find out more to really understand different perspectives? The first theme that came out from that research was around places and people. We had factions of the organisation who were absolutely clear, this is about footpaths. We need a world-class path network in this country, and if we get that, it'll be fine. Forget about the people who want to use it or anything, it's all about the footpath network. The second faction was all about campaigns. You've got to win the fight or no one will be walking anywhere. And the third faction was about walking. It was about those who was just about getting your boots on and doing that 12 mile on a Saturday, and that was the most important thing we had to wrestle with. The second thing was that the evidence is stacked writ large. It's well researched and well documented that getting out walking improves your mental health and well-being, improves your physical health, and it enables people to have longer and happier lives. What that quickly got us to was this wasn't a trade-off between places and people. You had to have both in existence together. If anything, there was more of a bias towards people. What was the difference we were making for whom, and what was the difference that we wanted to make? And particularly the difference we were making for individuals, for communities, and for society. And the third one, which is probably the most important one, it was the fact that the inequity of access to the outdoors was writ large. It was a real challenge, and it remains a real challenge in this country. And how were we playing our part to challenge that inequity? Because it was the inequity that actually started the organisation back in the 1930s. So if you talk about the fight still remains. And if not, it's even graver now. The research really challenged us as an organisation. We found it really hard. The board, at some points, almost with their hands over their ears saying, tell me no more. Because what we realised was that Ramblers wasn't relevant as an organisation to those who could potentially benefit most from it. There was a realisation we had to change. There was a burning platform. The reality of if we keep doing the same things to the same people in the same way in a world that has changed around us and continues to change at an accelerating pace, we will lose pace. And if we're not already looking at a date now, what will it look like in the future? And that goes one way and ain't a pretty picture. There was real clarity need to be sought on was this about public benefit? Was this about being a charity? Or was it a private members club? And they were real stark choices people had to really wrestle with and really lean into. Equally, we were absolutely sure there was a moment in time to act, but we had to act decisively. If we didn't wrestle with this challenge around purpose, we would put it back on the too hard to do shelf, as had been done in the past, and we would walk past it, and we wouldn't be able to make the difference that we really wanted to do. We had loads of really challenging discussions. Matt and Hannah party to those helped us through that. To really get a sense of actually what did we want to get out of all the things that we knew. We were able to socialise the theory of change internally and really importantly externally, because if you wanted to take this thing somewhere different, you had to get the views of other people to get a sense of what is going to crack the nut or not. The theory of change enabled us to articulate our purpose, our priority audience, and importantly our outcomes, amongst other things. We did lots of engagement with our members and volunteers. And again, that was tough because there was a bit of an abject rejection of what's the problem. I don't know why we're bothering doing all this nonsense. But really, it got us to a place of saying we have to focus on the individuals who face the most barriers, who will benefit most from getting out walking in nature. That simple act of walking shoulder to shoulder. We did lots of brilliant examples that were elicited as a result of the engagement that we did with individuals, all of which was interestingly aligned to the purpose that we were advocating was the thing we needed to get up to. Whether that was mental health walks for young men facing challenges in communities, whether it was weekly walks for those seeking asylum in this country, or was it wellbeing walks through a social prescribing network. Developing that theory of change, being really clear on the purpose, has really paid dividends for us. And it's really got us to a place, as Hannah alluded to earlier, around the things that we are absolutely going to do, but really importantly, the things we're not going to do. Be really clear about the things that we're going to say no to, and that's been quite tough. So we're on a journey. It takes time to change an 89-year-old organisation and to give it some kind of future focus. But the clarity of purpose, the understanding of the difference we're making and how we can make the biggest difference is really making a huge impact.
Thank you very much. So we're going to open up for questions, and while we get the tech behind us, could I just ask you both to reflect on what you would have done differently from where you are now? So is there anything that you'd have done differently through your process to define purpose?
So I think, Sarah said something really interesting earlier, which was about disagree and commit. And I think that's something that's really resonated with me. And I think sometimes we disagree and we try to get everyone on board and we try and get them to kind of, agree with you. And that's hard. And it takes a long time. I think where we are, we've been on a journey and this has taken a number of years. I think sometimes having that culture to say disagree and commit and do something and let's try it and come back and review it and whether it's worked is, I think that's what we would have probably done differently, actually. And I think that would have helped us move a lot quicker.
Thank you.
I would say you've got to keep it simple. Again, we went down what I described as going down some wells, and we could kind of see the light, but we couldn't quite find the ladder. And again, the overcomplication sometimes of some of the more nuanced points took us to quite some dark places. And the second thing I would say is you've really got to build a coalition of people around about you who want to do this. And again, if you're a lone voice in all this, it feels much harder. And I think if you've got a few people around about you who understand the concepts of being able to define purpose and therefore how it is used to advance an organisation, but you need that strength of kind of feeling around you.
So just looking at the questions. So Ross, I'm going to come to you about the balance between doing things really collaboratively and leading decisively. And I just wondered if you could just tell us about your tips from the process we went on.
Yeah, I would say this isn't easy. And again, anyone going into this, again, go in with your eyes open, but again, reap the rewards. I think the tension is healthy, and I think you've got to embrace the tension. I think the thing that was the moment we turned the corner was when we paused the process. We, as ever, had set out, here's the process, it's going to be these dates, blah, blah, blah. We paused the process. We talked to Matt and Hannah about saying, we've got a real kind of bold vision here. And I remember a conversation from Matt saying, how decisive do you want to be? Because this isn't going to be easy. And actually, I'm pretty much up for this because the mandate I had was you need to do something different with this organisation to take it somewhere different. I think pausing on that in the process to do more research really helped us make the case. And it helped us make the case to our members, where you can really say to people, here are the 3 reasons why we think this thing is going to make a difference. And it isn't about taking something away from you. It's about saying, how do we enhance the stuff that you do with greater purpose that leads to greater outcomes. I think it's about leaning into the conversation, being driven by the data, but again, going back to a coalition of people around about you who can help make the change.
Thanks, Ross. So we're going to talk a little bit more about lived experience, and just to build on that point within your work, we did go out to do interviews with those people who didn't walk with the Ramblers, so those people who weren't served by them but might be very sort of willing to be that, so people facing the most barriers, and that, I think, was a very illuminating process. I know that Mufeedah and Hibiscus, you talked to some of the people you work with as well. Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly in defining the theory of change, a lot of focus groups were held, including with employees, but also with our service users and beneficiaries as well. So it was important to make sure we got their voice involved in the work that we do. And certainly I think that's been something that we've very much recentered. So the lived experience of our service users is now very much core and centre of everything that we do. So we make sure that when we're doing publications, when we're talking on women's behalf, that it's their voice that's informing that. And I'm going to give you one example. So maybe like 2 years ago, Hibiscus worked with an organisation to produce a film, and there was a screenwriter involved in this, and she came and met with the women in our women's centre, and she listened to them, and she went away and she wrote the script. And it was about this mermaid who changes, and she did something with a rainbow probably. And she presented this to the women, and they turned around and they were like, no, this is not our story. It's not romantic. It is not fluffy and shiny. It's hard. It's tough. And the screenwriter basically ripped it up, and she wrote a verbatim script based on the words of the women. And I think that's really sort of, that's really important to us in how we deliver our work and how we change public perception and how we influence policy, is to make sure that we're using and we're respecting the voices of our women. It's difficult for us because of the trauma that our service users have experienced. So we need to make sure that we're respectful of that we're not re-traumatizing, we're not re-triggering. So it's not easy, it is challenging, but it's certainly something that's very core of what we do.
Thanks, Mufeedah. I'm going to come to the question about embedding the impact framework that you've started. So you're quite far down the journey now, aren't you, on collecting data? And the question is, any tips on embedding the sort of impact framework into the organisation and sharing that insight effectively?
Wow. So we've been on a pilot project for about 1.5 years now of sort of testing our measures, trying them in different environments in which we work in. We're doing that in 2 ways. So we're asking employees to record information themselves, and we're also asking our service users to complete a short survey every 3 months. So we're doing sort of 2 different types of measurement. I think one of the biggest challenges has been trying to get employees on board and trying to get them to do that extra work, particularly, and as you all know, some funders expect you to record, 20 different things. And if you've got 20 different funders, you're suddenly, it's a million things that you suddenly have to record. And now we're asking them to do something different. So that's been sort of challenging, I would say. So I would say the thing that we've done with that is make sure that we've worked quite with small teams. We haven't tried to do too much too soon with everybody. And what that's enabled us to do is really to kind of test a little bit in one team, present that to the whole of the organisation, and then they sort of kind of, they go, oh, that's interesting. Actually, how would that look for our team? Well, we can show you. You can find out. You can do some yourself. So trying to get that sort of engagement, I think, is in different ways, but also acknowledging that this is extra work for our teams, and it's extra work for, at a time when capacity is really difficult. I think the other thing as well, and I think this sort of goes back to my earlier point, is I think we dragged our heels a little bit. So we've had sort of turnover of staff, change in leadership, and I think there were at times when we lost momentum. So I think that was what I would say is try and make sure that this doesn't just sit with one person, that it sits with a group of people, so that you don't lose that momentum when, people naturally move on as well.
Thanks, Mufeedah. And I think the word pilot is really important here. So people often think once you've got a theory of change and an outcomes framework, that's it, boom, you're going to be collecting that data next week. And actually, we really see with all of our clients, we'll be saying you need to pilot, learn, and once people can see their data coming through, they usually want to be on your dashboard. And so it's a real motivation, I think, and people can really get excited. Ross, I'm going to ask you to take the question around sort of decisions and prioritizations, which should be based on purpose but sorry, which should be based on purpose become purely on money. So how do you get out of this trap? Have you any reflections around making decisions around your purpose, not on money, just on money and income?
Yeah, and I think this links to, in terms of the theory of change, in terms of the activities that you see as being the things that are going to shift the dial in terms of your outcomes, and being really clear about the ones that are going to make the biggest difference. I think it's hard when you haven't got a data set to necessarily draw upon that says these interventions are going to make the biggest difference. And again, as Mufeedah refers to, it does take time and it's hard. Hard, but worth the journey. And I think it isn't always a binary decision around should we put the money into this particular program or this particular intervention, because we kind of think it's going to make a difference. I think layering it against your theory of change and saying, do we know this intervention based on the data set we've got? Does it give us enough to be able to say we should scale this, we should do something different, we should stop it, whatever? And I think it isn't, as I say, a binary choice, but I go for the thing that gives you the biggest impact and biggest outcomes based on the investment you're prepared to make.
Brilliant. And there is a question about recapping on when you ended up on your purpose, Ross, for the Ramblers. What did you end? Could you recap on where you ended up on the revised purpose?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we ended up with a purpose which essentially says we campaign for access to the outdoors, and we do that for those who will benefit most, and therefore those who face the most barriers, which is quite a departure, if you like, from an organisation which was a private members club. Still is to an extent, but of course we're kind of turning the corner on that, which is, again, not. I feel like I'm saying this isn't easy, right? I'm just trying to portray a picture of saying it's tough, but it's really, really worth it, because it's deeply energizing at the same time. Sometimes you find yourself in the well, but other times it's deeply energizing and elating.
Thank you. The last question around the importance of bringing boards into the discussion early on purpose. I just would like to address that I can't tell you how often the board and the delivery staff and SLT have a completely different view of what the purpose is. So that's just my reflections, having worked with about 40 charities now on this issue. And if you're trying to decision make, that's really difficult. But to open it up to those of you on the board, I don't know how your board members were involved with Hibiscus. I know Ramblers, we worked a lot with them.
Yeah, so with Hibiscus, our board was very much sort of the driver behind us needing to refocus and recenter the women within our work as well. So yeah, very much the board were there to set the strategy and approve the strategy, brought in an executive team who were able then to feed into that, to do the work in engaging with the teams and with the service users as well, and then really to deliver that strategy. So I think it really needs to be the whole of the organisation brought into that, and the board's a really key part of that.
Yeah, and Ross, we had a working group, didn't we? We nominated 3 board members that came with us on the journey to every workshop, and we went back and forth to board meetings. So
A lot.
Yeah, so I think you have to bring your board with you, but you also have to bring other staff, and it's a mixed group. It's not just the same group of makes decisions. It's a mixed group of frontline trustees, volunteers sometimes, certainly in your case, and a range of perspectives to really discuss these and give them that remit to be able to discuss and debate those on behalf of the organisation.
Great. So thank you very much indeed. And Ross,